Over the phone lines today is Mageswari Sangaralingam, who is the Honorary Secretary with Sahabat Alam Malaysia. Good morning, how are you?
Hi, good morning.
Good
I'm
morning.
fine, thank you.
All right. So, microplastics, this is something that is very, 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 very evident nowadays. And let's start off with the questions, right? When we think of plastic pollution, we normally think of plastic bags littering our streets or plastic containers washing up on our beaches. Still, there are nearly invisible plastics in our food, water, and air, and even our clothing, which is otherwise known as microplastics. Can you tell us about microplastics and how do they end up in our food?
Okay, so plastics have become very pervasive in our societies and also the environment. There are many types of plastics and used in many, many sectors. So microplastics are fragments of any type of plastic which is less than 5 millimeter in length. Yeah, so they come from a variety of sources, including from larger plastic debris that degrades into smaller and smaller pieces, or also from the resin pellets used for plastic manufacturing. And then there's also microplastics which are formed during plastic recycling processes. So in addition, there are also microbeads, which is a type of microplastics. These microbeads are tiny pieces of plastic that are added as exfoliants to health and beauty products, such as cleaners and toothpaste. There's also microplastics in your toothpaste. These tiny particles will end up in water bodies and then actually later on pose a potential threat to aquatic life and birds because they can mistake these microplastics for food. Okay, how do we get microplastics into our body? We ingest microplastics when we eat and drink, including from food packaged in plastics. Studies have found microplastics in bottled water, bottled beverages like beer, wine. There's also commercial fish and shellfish and other food. So as I mentioned, several studies have found even microplastics in bottled tea, milk, honey, sugar, and salt. One study, actually, how they did the study, they found that steeping plastic tea bags, because not all tea bags are made from other materials, there's also plastic tea bags. You steep that in hot water, it releases about 2.3 million microplastic particles.
Wow.
These are microplastics. If you're looking into nanoparticles, it was about 14.7 billion nanoparticles in 1 cup of tea. And then there's also another study that found that, infants, now they are being fed using plastic baby bottles. So from sterilizing these plastic bottles, babies can also ingest as many as 3 million microplastic particles per day. So this is really very concerning. So this is how microplastics can end up in our food.
And it really sounds quite scary as well because the numbers are all in the millions and the billions. And let's talk about the microplastics that are most commonly found in food. What are those? What types are those?
So most of the plastics produced globally, they are used for food and beverage packaging. So during its use, depending on the environmental conditions such as heat, these plastics can degrade and they break into smaller fragments. Some reports indicate that polyethylene and polypropylene, which are normally used for packaging because they are lightweight and durable, these are the most common plastics present in food and the environment. So as I mentioned just now, when this plastics degrade, it becomes microplastics and nanoplastics. So we really need to be concerned of the chemicals that are used in making plastics, some of which are toxic and that ends up in our food.
All right. And what are some of microplastics most commonly found in the food chain? Where are they most commonly found in the food chain? Is it in seafood, agricultural products, or where?
Okay, so there are trillions of microplastics in the ocean. So it's not surprising that fish and shellfish species like crabs and all these other seapods, they have been reported to be contaminated with microplastics. So due to their small size, microplastics are readily ingested by marine life. And then this is transported through the marine environment via the food chain. You have the small fish and then you have the large fish eating the big fishes. And then finally, we eat fish. So it also poses a potential threat to humans. But there is less data regarding microplastics in foods and vegetables. But there are already pioneer studies that have detected microplastics in edible fruits and vegetables. the researchers assume that, microplastics can be absorbed similar to how nanomaterials are being absorbed by vegetables and fruit trees.
So similar to how minerals are absorbed by the plants.
Yes, so if it's like we're talking about microplastics, but there's also nanoplastics, so this could also be absorbed by the plants.
Wow, so they're so tiny, so they are able to go through the vascular system of the plants itself. Wow, that is scary. That's actually the first time I'm hearing about that. Well, tell you what, Miss Mageswari, what we're going to do right now, we're going to take a very short break. We're going to listen to a song, and once we come back, there's more to talk about microplastic on our plates. Thank you for being here with us, and right now we'll be taking a short break.
Okay.
Welcome back to What Matters. So we are talking about microplastic on our plates today with Miss Mageswari Sangaralingam, who is an honorary secretary with Sahabat Alam Malaysia. Welcome back, Miss Mageswari.
Hi, fantastic.
Right. So let's talk about the microplastics, right? And of course, what are some of the substances that are being released from microplastic?
As I mentioned earlier, plastics contains a lot of chemicals. So microplastics should be actually considered as a toxic pollutant, because research findings, they show that they contain toxic chemicals within their structure, and this microplastics also absorb additional chemicals, including toxic chemicals like PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, pesticides, heavy metals, and also other hydrocarbons. So they absorb that from the environment. So these chemicals can be released into the tissues of animals that consume the microplastics. And this is responsible for the harmful health effects. So there have been research showing that, they have observed, changes in development, physiology, and gene expression, from these animals that have consumed microplastics.
Okay. So in sense, it acts as a sponge, and just the particle itself that is dangerous, but it also brings in a lot of other chemicals alongside it as well.
Yes, so it has its chemicals and also absorbs more chemicals and then releases it when we consume.
Right. And how does it get to the environment?
So there are many pathways for microplastics to get into the environment. As I had also mentioned earlier, microplastics are already in small and large water bodies in our oceans. And then there's also plastic microfibers. They are commonly found in indoor air and dust, and they are also found in high concentrations in outdoor air and in major cities. But then there's also in remote areas, they have found microplastics in the Arctic, the Mount Everest, Mount Fuji. So one study in 2020, it found that, airborne microplastics, they may be released when we wear synthetic clothing. Because most of our clothes are also made from plastic, and like polyester and all that. And also microfibers are released when we are washing the clothes, in the washing machine, and also drying those synthetic clothes. And tires have also been found to be a source of microplastics in the air. So, and there's also sources of airborne plastics, include in agricultural fuels, when they do mulching, the plastic sheets in farmlands. So when these degrade, so this is also part of how microplastics get into the air. So there's like so many ways it can get into the environment and finally ends up in human bodies also.
So any pathway, as you said, there's a lot of ways of getting in there. So and also plastic is one of the biggest things on the planet right now. So anywhere it gets degraded, anywhere it breaks down into microplastic or nanoplastic, it gets into the environment.
Into the environment, yes.
All right. Yeah. And how does microplastics affect human health? How much do they harm us?
Yeah, so many common plastic additives, they are added into the plastic here. They are endocrine disrupting chemicals. What are EDCs? EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, are natural or human-made chemicals that mimics or blocks or interfere with the body's hormones. Because our hormones are involved throughout all our body systems, EDCs are associated with a wide range of health impacts. This includes cancer, early puberty in girls, obesity, diabetes, infertility or reproductive disorders, some neurodevelopmental effects, including like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, autism. So there's so many diseases involved in terms of the EDCs. But then a major challenge is that when these illnesses arise, for example, cancer, diabetes, or cardiovascular disease, they cannot be traced specifically to plastics. Because such illnesses can also be caused by many other factors. But then, despite the lack of this cause-effect links to the specific illnesses, the science shows that there is a reason to be concerned. And although there is more research needed, there is also a clear potential for risk to human health. So we need to take precautionary measures, in terms of our exposure to plastics and also these microplastics.
Understood. And Ms. Mageswari, we're going to be taking another short break, and once we come back, we'll be coming on to the final part of our interview for today. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
All right.
on Tracks. We are currently on microplastics on our plates on What Matters with Miss Mageswari Sangaralingam, who's an Honorary Secretary with Sahabat Alam Malaysia. Welcome back. And Miss Mageswari, who is most vulnerable to the effects of microplastic consumption?
Okay, I also had to do some research here, and I found a report by earthday.org. They indicate that babies and infants are particularly vulnerable to the health risks associated with microplastic exposure. This is due to various factors because, including babies, they crawl, during feeding, they are tasting objects. So the exposure is largely because of their, they like to chew onto their plastic toys, and then there's clothes, so from the furniture and indoor air pollution. And also studies indicate that the babies ingest and inhale higher levels of microplastics compared to adults. Yeah, and who is particularly vulnerable to the, remember I mentioned about the endocrine disrupting chemicals?
Yes.
So developing fetuses. So even before you're born, the fetuses are also vulnerable to this microplastic consumption.
And I think I read a research somewhere quite some time ago where they said they have already detected microplastics in, babies within the womb itself.
Uterus, in the blood, in our brain. So it's like everywhere.
Yeah, and of course, are certain foods more prone to microplastic contamination?
So there was one research, it was titled Human Consumption of Microplastics. It has been published in Environmental Science and Technology. It presented an analysis of 26 studies from around the world. And they calculated the average amount of microplastics found in common consumables, what we consume, the food and drinks. They found that the biggest known source of microplastic which enters our bodies is bottled water.
Bottled water.
Bottled water, plastic water bottles. So you find it, the most found was in that, and based on 4 studies, the average number of microplastic particles per liter was 94.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what they found. So this is actually easily, avoidable. Don't drink water from plastic water bottles.
I'm actually at fault for that. I'm carrying a 2-liter water bottle right now, and I'm looking at it. I'm going like, how many microplastic particles are in there? And it's like, these are things that we can't see, but once you know about them, then you definitely will do something about them, right? And when it comes to the state of our Earth, right, people like us, we all often feel helpless and don't realize that small cumulative actions can add up to significant changes over time. What is one thing our listeners can start doing to change the trajectory of our planet, especially in the sense of microplastics?
Okay, so we need to break free from plastics. There is a global movement in terms of this, to break free from plastics. And globally, a significant reduction in virgin plastic production and consumption is needed. So we need to replace plastic containers and products with safer, durable materials. For instance, you were saying you are using a plastic water bottle. You can replace that with stainless steel, or drink from glass, whatever. So, and you can also replace plastic baby bottles with glass bottles. When we were growing up, it's like, there were no plastic baby, these are bottles. So we used to drink from glass bottles. And you can also bring your own containers, preferably non-plastic, to tapau your food. And avoid microwaving or heating food or water in plastic. Sometimes there are the containers, they say it's microwave safe, but you should avoid heating plastics. And globally, there is this negotiations which is ongoing for a global plastics treaty. This would be a legally binding instrument to address plastic pollution in its entire life cycle. So we need to support for a strong treaty that has binding measures, and we are calling for a binding measure to cut plastic production. So what Malaysians can do is write to the Malaysian government or sign petitions, which is calling for a strong treaty that limits plastic production and consumption. So you stop using plastic wherever which is possible, and then you can also write to the government, Malaysian government or also other governments. There are a lot of petitions going on calling for a strong treaty. So this is what we can do.
That is true. Yes, that is true. For me personally, I've already done the food container thing. I only use glass food containers. I try and use as little plastics as I can nowadays. But then, unfortunately, for water bottles, I still think I am using it. But you know what? I'm going to order my stainless steel bottle in just about a bit. Right.
Yeah.
Miss Mageswari, thank you so much for your info and your insight today. And before we wrap up, anything else that you would like to add for our listeners?
Okay, the main challenge I can see is that microplastics and nanoplastics, they're impossible to avoid because it is everywhere.
Yes.
But however, we can reduce the risk of exposure because more plastics means more microplastics, and then there's more pollution and contamination of our food and drinks and our environment. So this affects our health and the environment. So the best way forward is for consumers to use less plastic, and also ultimately we transition away from plastics. This has to be a global action that is being taken. So that is why we are pushing for this, robust global plastics treaty.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks so much for talking to us about this, and hopefully we can have you in the studio next time, and we can talk even more about microplastics and also other initiatives. And with that, I think it's about time that we end our interview for today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Right.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Have a nice day. Yeah.
So that was Mageswari Sangaralingam, who is an honorary secretary with Sahabat ala Malaysia. We spoke about microplastic on our plates. It is quite dire, it is quite scary, but you know what? We can do something about it. Reduce the use of plastic. If one person did it, not much can be seen, but if everyone did it, the changes can be quite monumental, right? So with that, it's about time we get on back with the music. I'll be back in the next hour. Don't go anywhere. You're currently listening to Tracks.